Hello, hello. I'm so happy today to have Ralph Bianculli, the founder and CEO of Emerald Ecovations, to be with us and chat with us. I'm so happy, Ralph, to have you. And I was just looking through your website and the mission you guys are on, and this is going to be an exciting conversation. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, Ved. It's it's my pleasure to be here.
Great. Let's start with right. Let's start right in the beginning. I see that you had a career which is very interesting, diverse, and of course touches on many things that you eventually got to do. You know, whether it's food service or it's pulp and paper and things like that. So tell us about growing up and influences that led you to what you do today.
Well, the fact is, I grew up not as a farm boy living on Long Island, 45 minutes outside of Manhattan, but I had the pleasure of living very close to Belmont Racetrack, which was one of the largest thoroughbred racetracks in the country, still is, uh, and had the opportunity to work around animals as a very young boy, starting at 13. So it did influence me in a lot of ways, as far as being very, very involved with livestock and different types of farmland, going out to the farms. So it was an interesting period, and it sort of molded me as I eventually got very involved in business and landed my first real career running the food service operations at the three major racetracks in the New York region. And at that time, it was the largest spectator sport in the country. 4.2 million spectators a year. And very few people really know that because today the racing industry is a little different with all the digital betting that's taking place. So um, I had that great experience about being around animals, but more importantly, I started really cutting my teeth on business and understanding high volume business in food service.
Yeah, that's interesting. And in terms of racing, did you ever try to be a jockey?
Oh, geez, I think that was about 80 pounds ago. But that's that was my height might have worked, but the everything else didn't. But I did actually spend a lot of time with those athletes, and quite honestly, they're quite athletic considering they're on a 1,100-pound animal doing 40 miles an hour. So. Um, it was an interesting experience, and I did meet a lot of folks in the sports enterprises because it was a very attractive sport at the time.
Yeah, I remember one of my mother's cousins was a jockey in Calcutta, India, which was really fun because it used to be, again, like you're right, it used to be such a huge thing even then. And this, I'm talking 40 years back. And we used to really look up to him. And of course, you're right, he's definitely 40 pounds heavier now. So it's interesting
That's
what
right.
happens when you stop.
It's an evolution. It sure is.
Yeah, so what I also see in our research is there's significant changes that you bring in around 1995 to do with your son. And tell us that transformation and how that took place and how it influenced your life path going ahead.
Well, as I previously said, I spent some time in food service. I worked for a large food service operator running the three racetracks. Experienced quite a bit in the business side, but I also experienced the waste of disposables in the space. And at that time, I looked at it as a business opportunity and transitioned into business of the packaging world of food service, and that took place in the late '80s. Um, and as I was involved in that business, I was fortunate enough to meet the right folks, listen to the right people, and be educated in the space. And quickly became one of the largest distribution groups in the country. And with that, brought the enormous amount of paper and plastics to the marketplace. At one point, I was probably one of the largest foam cup suppliers in the country and serviced a lot of coffee service operators in different parts of the country. Um, and as I learned the production and manufacturing side of the equation, I started quickly realizing there was some real issues with some of the materials that were being used. Um, and at that point in 1994, my youngest boy was born. And unfortunately, we ran into a situation where, till today, we can't ID the problem, but it certainly came back to what we firmly believe was an environmental issue, which was a big turning point for me. in the evolution of the distribution space, I quickly did a lot of research and trying to understand how damaging some of the materials I was using. And we're talking traditional resin, plastics, and uh, fluorocarbons that were being utilized in the manufacturing aspect, as well as the cutting of trees and so on. So I did a lot of research, and lo and behold, what I did find out as I traveled around the world, uh, we may think we're ahead of the curve in a lot of things. One of them is we're not ahead of the curve when it comes to uh, utilizing our natural resources and being able to recover them, right? Everything was very disposable. And back in that day, it was use it, throw it out, it ends up in landfills. And, I said, there's a better way. I did travel quite a bit to Europe, to Asia, visited quite a few countries, try to understand their aspects of aggregating materials. And in the late 90s, I spun off a business group. I was acquired earlier by Georgia Pacific. I was doing some R&D work with them. And I spun off a business group in the late 90s with the intent of trying to find a better way of making materials that everyday essentials and do it in a way that was much more respectful to the environment. And that was pretty much the launch. And that began in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I speak to people today, they think I started this business last month. So it goes to show what it takes to really change an industry.
And that's really early on, but I'm going to dig a little deeper on this big change that came into your life. How did you point your finger that it had something to do with the environment and I mean your son's health? How did that realization even happen? Because people don't realize that many times. So it's interesting to hear you say that.
Well, back in that time in the 90s, there was very little, um, I would say, interest or even understanding of some of the external things that take place in, let's say, vaccines. Um, and as a family, we did a lot of research to understand, had my son to many different doctors, both from a holistic and medical fields. And what we did find out during this great little journey, um, and a lot of it had to do with really looking into the records of, at that time, the FDA. We didn't realize that vaccines had a additive called thimerosal. And till today, very few people even know what thimerosal is. But it's a mercury additive that acts as a barrier to many vaccines for shelf life. Um, so um, we could never say we could pinpoint anything because it's a barrier in front of you to break down to really get the facts. But what we did learn was why do we need these external materials that are not natural to the body? Um, so it really perpetuated my entire family into looking into what the heck is going on. And even though we did reveal the Marisol as a problem, and today you have an option, which again isn't advertised, but you do have an option to say, I don't want the vaccine with the Marisol. Uh, and back then you didn't, right? It was a little different. But did we disrupt an industry? Not really, but we did expose some of the things that were very evident. But with that, I really reflected on some of the things I was doing, and I said I can make things better, and I can do it in a way that's uh, much more responsible as a producer of goods. And the everyday essentials is the only thing I had control over. So we certainly put our energy behind that. And when I spun off the business group, we really started with no idea of products and understanding the depth it took to be able to aggregate materials, put together finished goods, and be able to market it all at the same time. So it was a very slow, progressive time in our business development. Fortunately, we had other business operations that we were able to support the investments made, um, and it was a real journey. And there was every step of the way there were naysayers. Right, it could never be done. Products won't function. The price will never be relative to what current pricing is. Anybody enters a new industry, we all know the challenges, but at the end of the day, 99% of the people didn't think it was achievable at that time. So you have to break those barriers. You have to have the confidence. You have to surround yourself with the right people. And at the end of the day, you build on something slowly, block by block. And it did take quite a few years to move into where we are today. But the first 10 years was very, very challenging.
I can imagine because you were so early in this whole sustainability journey. I was just reminded of a book that I read. I think it's called Sicker, Fatter, Poorer. Have you ever come across that?
No, I haven't.
It's fascinating, and you would love this from your personal journey because it talks a lot about different chemicals that go into our bodies without obviously us knowing. And this could be just GM fertilizers, pesticides, and how they are causing so much havoc, particularly in the United States, because there is so much more. Here, I was listening to somebody say that their bellies behave different when they eat bread in the United States versus we were talking about Italy, in Europe, because the wheat is different, and it's not as processed. It doesn't have the kind of chemicals that are added here for longevity, for primarily. And the other one, I was listening to this other nutritionist, and she said something really fascinating. It was very simple, and she said, "Do not eat anything that doesn't rot." It was simple as that.
Right,
Because that's the natural action, right? Like if you put it out on your windowsill, it should rot. So
right.
if it's not rotting for a long time, means
That's a
that there is
problem.
things added to it. So of course, I took goldfish to my daughter and said, "Does this rot?" you
Yeah,
know, and the crumbs lying here and there in her room, and she was like, "Yeah, look, it's becoming a little white, so I can eat goldfish."
yeah.
but processed food does all of that. I'm going to stay with your trajectory. Of course, there's one company that you work with called Spiro Wallach, I guess, and I probably am not pronouncing it right. And then there is Unisource. There is, of course, the GP experience. How did all of these experiences, apart from your Aramark experience, which you spoke a little bit about, they probably added a lot of value to what you do eventually, which is, of course, Emerald. And how does this journey help you go to Emerald?
Well, like everything in life, experiences are the core to anything if you accept them, if you learn from them. But as I uh, quickly got involved in the distribution side, and I was a partner in this group called Spirowalik, which was a traditional packaging company. I brought relationships to the distribution world because I had so many opportunities to meet folks in the food service. So building that company was really the cornerstone of understanding the disposables and the everyday essentials. We quickly became a very large distribution group. And at that time, as I reflected on earlier, we were probably one of the largest foam cup suppliers in the space at that time. And that turned into an opportunity where we were actually purchased by a major conglomerate, public company at the time, called Unisource Worldwide. And they had 212 distribution centers around the country. And they acquired us because they were very, very interested in how I diversified a company like Spirowalik in a very short period of time. And they wanted to mirror that across the country, which at that time it was a very good opportunity for me and two of the partners, and we decided to go forward with it. And we unfortunately find out that some of these companies do things in the public world that are a little off the record type of issues, and quickly became a problem. Uh, and that company then ultimately sold to GP on a paper kind of transaction. And GP, actually, I was absorbed by Georgia Pacific as an individual, and I was given the opportunity to work with the R&D side because they saw me as a marketing person besides a salesperson. Um, and so that skip, and it was only a 4 year period. It was very quick. Um, but I really learned a lot. I learned more about distribution and more about manufacturing And the manufacturing piece is what really elevated me to truly understand that we could do things differently. So here we are in the 90s, and I had a contract, obviously, with Georgia Pacific. And with that, I said we could do something different. And Georgia Pacific listened to what I had to say, but didn't realize at that time it wasn't something that they thought was feasible or economical to a company that owns a lot of forest, right? And I understood that. And we had a great relationship where I was able to say, let me spin off a business group, which we did. And that started the journey into what ultimately became our Paradigm Marketing Group. And in that group, we have several operating businesses. So we truly spent a lot of the funding that was generated from the other operating businesses into the R&D early in 2000 and started the process. And this process took quite a few years, obviously, but it was a great journey and it was a great learning experience. But I saw all aspects of industry. I saw the operational end with the Airmark food service. I saw the distribution end, and then I saw the manufacturing end. So I was fortunate to see all three areas of the industries, and brought that experience to the table when we created Emerald and Paradigm.
So there's this continuous kind of string that I see of a very strong center, a very strong sense of integrity. Like choosing what you really want to do and doing it in the right way. Where does that come from? Is that your childhood? Is that parents? Where would you put that finger on?
Well, I grew up in an Italian family, and you either did it right or you did it wrong. And if you did it wrong, it wasn't very good. With there was three brothers, so it was four of us. And quite honestly, I did learn a lot from my father. He died early, unfortunately, um, but I did learn a lot. What I did learn was just hard work, right? Believe in something and just get up early and work late. And that's kind of where my work ethic was built into. But, when you experience personal challenges in life, particularly when it's related to things you recognize and can have some control over, it sort of puts you in a different world where there are things you can't control, and then there's things you can control. So what I really did was put a lot of my energy into things I could control, and quite honestly, I was somewhat um, repenting from the days of providing so much material to the market that was just not right. And I tell people this story, and it's incredible. But back in the '90s, when I recognized the problem with foam products, I did a little test with some of the bigger coffee groups that remain unnamed. But at that time, there was big competition in quality of coffee. And back then, it wasn't the Keurig world, it was traditional drip coffee into pots. And folks were trying to acquire the best coffee they can back then to compete with the big brands that were out there, like the Starbucks, that were evolving. And they would go and buy this, high level Blue Ridge Nigerian mountaintop type of coffee at $18 a pound back then, and they'd serve it. And I used to go into the test kitchen. So there was an experiment I did, and I said, well, I'm going to tell you what, you're spending a lot of money on coffee. Pour it into the foam cup. And they would pour this coffee into the foam cup, and I'd say, don't put milk, cream it, don't do nothing, just look. And what they saw in about 15, 20 seconds was a film just rising to the top of that black coffee. And they'd say, what is that? And I'd say, yeah, well, that's exactly what you're extracting out of the product. And back then, foam cups was the most inexpensive disposable for coffee. Uh, Within a year and a half, we had switched 90% of our clients into paper cups, right? Because of that relative simple experiment. And it's disruption like that changes industry. So you take a product that was one third the cost of a paper cup, and no one flinched to pay that much because there was a health related and a quality related issue. And that's how you change industry. Sometimes it is the shock and awe that's needed, but it's right in front of us half the time, and we never see it. So that one change was the start of an evolution for how I really evolved into looking at a lot of different products in the disposable space.
That's so interesting because again, my personal journey has been again against this whole kind of trajectory that we are on, and of course, mine came more from seeing so much litter around me and what we were doing to the planet, um, and yours is deeply personal. And I've constantly heard this when you've kind of put it more practically in terms of what does foam do. I was also told that it has significant carcinogens when you take something like that, and especially exactly what you said in terms of hot liquid poured into a foam cup, and you kind of did that experiment, and I'm going to try and do that, find a foam cup and put a hot
Try
liquid
finding
inside.
one, right?
Yeah, and a black coffee would probably show it a little more. But also, what I notice is a lot of the paper cups, even today, have polyethylene lining. How does that work? Like I'm sure you are very cognizant of this fact, so you must have done your experimentation with that. And is that more resistant to heat? And will that not leach, or do you think there is leaching that happens in that case as well?
Like everything in changing industries, there is several elements that need to be in play, and obviously, supply chain is one of them. And one of the biggest challenges as we evolve into these new materials is being able to scale products to the point where you have access to materials that are much more conducive to what your strategy and environmental plan is. In the case of paper cups, correct, they're PE lined, and it is a resin based lining, and it's an insulator. It's a barrier proof insulator, but it is a problem. And what we, today, your stepping stone is from, certified tree borne material to the fact that you're contributing to the helping forest, to the fact that PLA is an alternative material, and polylactic acid, which I'm a big fan of. Unfortunately, there's not enough capacity in the marketplace. So we have in our production lines multiple categories of products that are PLA. And we do bring PLA lined materials in paper cups that are actually tree free. So not only are they made from renewable resources, but they're also PLA lined. So they're 100% compostable. And that is the direction that I think industry is moving towards quickly. So there is an evolution taking place. And one of the things we have to do as an industry is not only constantly look at innovation, but we have to educate the public, right? We have to educate the supply chain. Um, and that's one of the mandates I built into our business was our accreditation platform, which is we have a very robust webinar program. We have ESA certification, which is an Emerald Sustainability Accreditation program. We have over 2,000 graduates in the supply chain and at the corporate level that really want to stay informed of what's happening. And there's an old saying: an educated consumer is our best customer, and that's very true. And that's what the industry needs to do. We need to continue evolve, but we need to educate because these materials are still very new. It was 4 years ago that bagasse in this country, nobody even knew what it was, right? You go around the world, everybody knows what bagasse is. South America, Europe, Asia, India, you knew what bagasse was. You come to this country 4 years ago, and there wasn't one person that even knew how to spell bagasse, never know what it was. So, and today it's become much more evident, and folks are understanding it. So, it is an educational block, building blocks that need to be done, and we are firmly behind that. We have a very robust webinar, as I said, but we also have a very vibrant podcast, and we bring other industry sectors in to talk about their challenges. So, education is one of the bedrocks of our business.
I'm going to probe you a little more on the specifics because you've brought in that example of foam, and that's so educative for me personally. So, do you know what happens when a polyethylene lining is exposed to a hot liquid? Is that stable? Because maybe the molecular chain is shorter, and of course PLA is another one. It's very new, and I loved your statement that you're a fan of PLA, and I'm going to dig a little bit more into that because again I hear both sides of PLA. But would you know how does a hot liquid behave, say at 80 degrees in a polyethylene and a PLA as well, apart from polystyrene?
Well, any type of testing you will do, let's use hot cups as an example, or soup containers. Uh, PE barrier works very well. In some cases, up to about 115 degrees, it stabilizes. But after a period of time, it will break down. You will see the walls from the outside in break down. Um, but the problem is that PE, when it does hit any type of landfill, it still has molecular properties that are resin-based properties, petrochemical properties. Um, and that's part of the leaching issues that a lot of landfills have today. And it leaves, very few options except incineration, which sounds great, but at the end of the day, if you ever go to these large incinerating facilities, you'll see at the end of the day they have dust, right? And they have to do something with that, and that ends up going into landfills anyway, right? So um, we are on a journey as a country and as a world to better understand functionality versus what is right for the environment. And it's going to take a lot of effort behind supply chain and, quite honestly, behind the legacy players in the space. We're not the biggest in the space of these materials, not by a long shot, but we are a disruptor and an educator in a space that needs to be restructured and re-engineered. So, as PLA as a product, you could hear both sides of the story because you're always going to find legacy players and supply chain saying, "Oh, PLA is terrible; it's no good." Well, the reason they say that is cost more. All right, it's gotten to the point where that scalability is about 30 to 35% more per pound on a resin basis versus a traditional PE. So, as the oil industries continue to drive what they believe is the right thing, uh, make no mistake about it, they are fully behind plastics, right? And unfortunately, um, as we have seen firsthand and are involved in on a day to day basis, um, recycling has been a perception, not a reality, right? Uh, you know, they could talk all they want about recovery and this, that, and the other thing. 90% of all these products never get recycled. And that's not me saying it. That's the folks who are collecting this product and dumping it, right, are saying it. So these exposures are taking place almost every day. And our job is to make sure the facts come out. And until we get some level of parity in pricing on certain elements in the supply chain, yes, you're going to pay a little more for something. Uh, but we were able to do 90% of our products in the scalable basis, tree-free fibers, renewable fibers. We work with aggregators to get that material, and that material comes to market, and we're very competitive against any non-green or even someone recycled products. Um, so there is the ability to get scale and then reach that 100% perfection. Um, and because we just announced the first of its kind composting. I don't know if you got a chance to see the most recent press release, uh, but that is our goal as a company. We've had the full circle, what we call cradle to cradle, on our whiteboard for 12 years. And that last leg in the journey is being able to aggregate from our users the product that has been used and bring it back to a compost and back to an organic state. So we just announced that. We'll be piloting that in the Northeast in the U.S. And we have been inundated with requests of how they can get on the programs, right? So uh, it is a long journey. It's not over, but these are factors in anything you're looking to change or re-engineer. And when you're up against legacy players that really haven't changed things in 100 years, um, I understand what it takes to recapitalize and re-engineer. I truly do. I'm a businessman, but at the same time, they need to really join in and follow what is ultimately the future, right? And that's what we believe in our organization, and that's what we're committed to. So, what's next?
Yeah,
We
lots,
don't
lots,
know.
lots to break down in that one. So there is a wonderful lady called Sean Sutherland, and we ended up doing two episodes with her. And you would love listening to that one if you haven't, because it's so interesting. And she really breaks down and dives into this whole idea of what you said, recycling. She said there is no such thing; it doesn't exist, and primarily because she said there is no such thing as plastic either, right? There is a bunch of, even if you create the molecular structure as a polyethylene or a polypropylene or whatever high density something and all of that, even PVOH and things like that. She said that it's not just alone. There is a huge melange of chemicals that go in. So even if you are quote unquote downcycling, you're never going to be able to, you are going to take off all those chemicals into the water streams and et cetera, because that's what keeps it together. And the other thing that she very, very smartly talks about is that it has to get out of this chain. Even if you call it downcycling, you cannot call it recycling, number one. But even if it's downcycling, in the end, it might become like a polyester. Thankfully, this is not, but it'll become a polyester shirt, and you can't do anything about it after that. It's going to be burnt or stay on the Atacama Desert or something like that. So you would love that, those two episodes. And she's a powerhouse of a person, really clear, like yourself, very clear on this idea that recycling is just a farce. And you can talk all about it, and you can say, like, whatever you said. You were very kind. You actually said almost 10%. You said 90% is not, so I assume 10% is. But she was just like, nah, not even like 5%. The rest is all data that has been created. But I know you're trying to speak, so I'll keep quiet.
No, 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 no. You're spot on. She's spot on, and the facts are coming out, right? And it's our job to bring those facts to the consumer, which has been suppressed for many years, and that is something that needs to be done. Now, is there the capability and the technology to create plastics that can be recycled and go back into the world? Yes, there is. But again, it takes re-engineering, and it takes an effort of the industry sectors to do that. Uh, but there's no aftermarket. See, that's the big problem with plastics, right? It's what do you do with it? And she's spot on. There are there are still many chemicals being used in petrochemical materials that no matter what you do with it, you put it back into the mainstream, somehow that potentially can affect you, right? As humans or animals. There needs to be a whole re-engineering of industry. It's not going to happen probably in my lifetime, but we want to be um, that disruptor that actually brings the facts to the table. That's all I ask is just bring the facts and let the consumer make the decision.
Yeah, and that's so important. I'm going to step back into PLA because I love this idea of you being a fan of PLA. So tell us more about that idea. And the two bits that I hear from a PLA standpoint on the technical side is, one is resistance to heat. What I'm told is that that's relatively poor, and I know there has been a lot of struggle in because it's a very brittle material, in really evolving it as a coating substrate. So three parts. So, tell us more about what makes you a fan, and then how do you tackle these two issues of heat resistance and coating ability?
Both are very achievable. In fact, both are being done. Right, PLA lined hot cups that we have in our production uh, functions very well. PLA um, um, substrates utilized in our soup containers function very, very well. There's a misconception there. Now, are you going to put it in a microwave or an oven for 4 hours? No. Uh, but for purposes of the disposable space, PLA does work. The problem with PLA is that it's essentially been controlled on the production side by a couple of major players who sort of keep it a little bit offline. They don't want to expand their capabilities of production. So that leaves the price differential like any other commodity. If you supply and demand is X, that price differential is 30 to 35% different than traditional, resins. And so PLA is a very functional product, and it does work. Now, again, it's not going to work under these other conditions that maybe folks are looking for it to work. But there are other products that are being tested today. We're working with groups with what we call an aqueous coating, which is a water-based coating, all natural. Um, it's got certain formulations that can't really disclose, but certainly are functional and environmentally friendly. Um, but they've got to be produced in a wide scale, and until you get that scale in production and be able to get that into the supply chain, it is still going to be a very high priced, entry into the market, and that's what keeps new innovation uh, restricted. So when you look at governments around the world and what they help to do and help to subsidize, um, these are very evident plays. These are products or solutions that can be developed, uh, but no one thinks of these types of essentials, right? They're all worried about electric cars, and I get it, and but when you look at the facts and how industry somehow suppresses them, deforestation represents nearly 17, 18% of all carbon release. No one talks about it, right? I mean, that's incredible. That's almost 1/5 of all carbon release on this planet is from deforestation. Yet it's suppressed, like the tobacco industry suppressed smoking back in the day. So we keep charging ahead, right? So bringing tree-free paper to the marketplace, uh, we've proven it works, it functions, consumers love it, it has a huge environmental impact. Um, these are the things that government needs to embrace and be able to say, hey, and we are in pretty good discussions with several states around the country uh, to enhance their ability to understand better how these things can work and how they can be part of the solution, not the problem. Uh, and so it's going to go. We're still at a very early stage, but these are the things that are proven, right? It's when someone says, "Geez, what about this? Let's think about that." Well, 340 products later, that's not what we have done, right? We've proved that products can get to market that can have a huge impact and can function and be priced competitively. So the next stage is okay. Let's open up the floodgates and let the rest of the country know what's really going on.
And you really lined up my next question really well because I was going to talk to you a little more about what you're doing. You stepped into the fray really early, Ralph, and you're talking like late '90s, which is way earlier than now. And there's every company talks about sustainability now, which is very different. And you've set a really high bar that you're going to do this and you're not going to do this. How do you choose the right suppliers? Say you just mentioned ideas around tree free, and there's going to be challenges in finding the right suppliers and the right products. What is that process like? How do you scout? How do you find that this is a good fit for something you want to pursue and distribute?
Well, it really, first of all, we have a reputation that is already a proven reputation. And when we go out to the supply chain network, uh, we actually very good due diligence, not only at the factory. We don't own any factories. We license factories under our guidelines. Um, But we're in the middle right now of acquiring a group that is aggregating probably 2 to 3,000 tons of miscanthus a month, and that is how you control your supply chain. Um, the this is an incredible opportunity that not only brings the cradle cradle solution, but it enhances opportunities for other industry sectors to reap the benefits, right? Farmers today could growing crops that are going to be paid for the types of crops that we need. Um, it enhances their ability to create income, particularly as farmland starts changing dramatically across this country. Um, so dairyland farmers are changing. Everybody, they have the land, they just don't have the ability to grow something that is marketable. Um, this is how we are controlling that supply chain. So, to answer your question, it does take quite a bit of due diligence to really understand every part of your product. We have third party lab testing. There's, believe it or not, there's only 2 labs in the entire U.S. that can actually break down fibers. Um, so we've been working with them for over a decade. Um, and these are the things you have to do, right? That these are the investments you need to make ongoing to keep your credibility on the front line. So we just got approved through the DEC of New York State on our materials as a complete breakdown in compostability, right? Right down to potential salmonella, right? What is in your product? So that is what you need to do to feel comfortable when you bring products to the market. But um, it's an evolution. It takes a lot of energy, but more importantly, you've got to be very consistent and persistent in what you do. Once you let your guard down in any supply chain today, you're vulnerable.
And my presumption is, and you can probably correct me on this, that a lot of your products may be imported. And that probably adds to the complexity, right? There's another country that you have to go to, and then you have to have the right supply chain guys, and then all of that. So, what would be the percentage of the total portfolio that is not manufactured in the United States yet? And
It's
then how do you make that work?
it's very similar to what we do in the U.S., right? In other words, our materials have to be vetted. The production process has to be vetted, and we do have third parties that actually do that vetting at the factory levels and the vetting at the supply chain levels. But at the end of the day, the results as our specs are required and the process being required. Uh, and there are countries that are advancing pretty quickly in areas they didn't weren't really in 5 years ago. Um, the Asian perimeter is really evolving quickly. There's South America is getting engaged in some of this because they see the opportunities to grow. But at the end of the day, when that product is done, we have a Q&A process that is very, very robust in the way we do things. And if that product spec on that Q&A levels aren't exactly what we want, there obviously is an issue. Quite honestly, I would say 99% of the time we are spot on. We do license our factories under licensing agreements, and they understand what it takes for them to spec exactly what we require. So, again, unless if you're not on top of your supply chain today, um, we've learned this from the pharmaceutical industry. If you're not, you don't know what's in that product, shame on you. Yeah.
And then just staying with the products, because of course you have a wide range of solutions, and that goes beyond even a singular industry. It could be multiple industries as well. How on the other side, how do you decide that this is what my customer needs and this is what I'm going to create? What is that process like? Like going forward, or you can reverse that idea. Going customer backward. This is what they need. I need to get out with the right product, and this is how I'm going to create my product portfolio. How does that process happen?
That's a great question. And it's a question that is pretty much an ongoing question, at least that comes to me at my desk. Um, we look at industries, and, there is issues where you have some finite material, and there's issues where you have a robust amount of materials, and that's why we're looking to aggregate more. Um, but we do own a packaging company that does provide packaging for a lot of shipping groups, a lot of e-commerce on the retail side. And we constantly are looking how to continually evolve in that space. And we did test some of our materials, our tree-free board material, chemical free, tree free, dye free, everything free except the product. And what we've done was we actually produced packaging for retail brands that literally the demand in that space is so big that I had to take a sidestep because we don't have that much capacity. It is a huge market, but there are companies that we have done the work for and continue to do that demand having their products that are all natural. They're natural, whether it's a cosmetic, a food, anything, vitamins, and they want it in an all natural package. So, our next step is to look at continually evolving in that space, hence, why we are looking to acquire more aggregate of raw materials. Uh, it's a huge space. It's going to require working with legacy providers of production, and it will be a huge disruption because again, we're up against the multi-billion-dollar producers of traditional board. But we will crack that code and we will work that market. So that's one of the things I'm working on ongoing. So to answer your question, we respond to industries that we know are embracing sustainability on the front end. Food service is really the early entry for us, and it was very easy for us. We have some of the biggest companies in the world that utilize our products, but there are other areas, and packaging is the next endeavor for us, and we're going to pursue that. The towel and tissue categories, huge opportunities in that space to take what is traditional tree borne or recycled out of the channels because when you talk about chemicals, not everybody recognizes what is really in toilet tissue, right? They consider it, it's toilet tissue. Well, we're going to continually expose what's really in toilet tissue. And when folks find out what's really in some of these products, they're quite disturbed and should be. Colon cancer is rampant. And yeah, there could be a lot of external causes, but one is really simple to solve, right? Stop using recycled paper when it comes to that. So, um, this is the ongoing evolution of products and the expansion as we go forward. And a lot of it has to do with listening to the market, but more importantly, being able to listen to what we're capable of doing, right? I have big dreams, but there are some things that aren't achievable. So we need to work within our own framework of what we're capable of doing. And there are quite a few categories we're going to pursue.
So I was earlier in this year, and maybe you were there too, the National Restaurants Association exhibition in Chicago. And it was amazing, Ralph, for me to see like there were like 60 suppliers, mostly from China, some from India actually, and they were all displaying the same thing. So it was clamshells and the 9-inch plates and what have you, the generic kind of food service products, and that might become a huge challenge, right? It's a kind of race to the bottom. It's all cost, cost, cost in the end, and there has to be some sanity that has to come into the space, and the market has to kind of be able to understand that. So how do you see differentiation? How would you differentiate your products versus somebody else? Because otherwise it's just that question, no, I'm going to buy it at $2,000 and I'm going to buy it at $1,800, and then finally somebody shuts down, and then then again there's a new search that happens, but it's the same product. So what happens? How do you differentiate that what I'm providing is different from somebody else? Because like you mentioned this a few times, and I'm going to club these two questions because there is that cost challenge, right? Somebody is always going to go to that customer and say, I can offer you a cent less, and that's a never ending game. So how do you differentiate, and then how do you manage cost?
I love that question. I truly do. And my folks who make presentations love that question. The product portfolio was built with quite a bit of experience behind it, right? And we talked about our ability to understand the operational side of the business, the distribution side of the business, and the manufacturing side of the business. And when you look at our portfolio, 340 products, it sounds like, wow, 340 products, that sounds great. What do you sell? Food service. Um, we built 5 product groupings within our portfolio. And what's happening in supply chain after COVID was one element of we have 50,000 products in our system. Well, the folks who are now in charge of the financial piece of the equation are saying, why do we have 50,000 products and why do we have so much redundancy? And why is it that we have to take in trailer loads from one manufacturer and another trailer load from another manufacturer? Um, we built our portfolio on what we call one brand total solution, right? And our mix and match portfolio represents about 80% of what's being consumed through the supply chain to the end users. So we have a very unique portfolio. It includes everything from the liners, the cleaning supplies, the packaging, the towel and tissue, and the food service. And all of that comes on one truck. And that's given supply chain that we partner with incredible ability to turn their inventories and at the same time bring an environmental category to the marketplace. So they don't need 2 or 3 different types of cups. They don't need 4 different types of towels. That's one element. But here's one of the other 2 elements, I should say, that are very, very important in our business. We talked earlier about education. Um, what we find in the supply chain is a huge lack of education. Uh, when someone talks about tree free, when we first tested the response levels, even with industry folks, 92% said it's recycled, right? So we recognized early on that we not only have to provide some of the best products with a nice portfolio of broad line, but we have to educate, right? The educated consumer is our best customer. And so fast become recognized as the leader in that education. So we love when we get interviewed by a company and they say, well, we have 2 other groups coming in. We love it. Okay, just give us that opportunity. And I have so much faith in our folks and being able to exemplify how good they really are, understanding what is in the product, where did the product come from, where does the product go. These are questions that today are becoming much more evident because the decision makers 5 years ago were called sustainability folks, but they didn't know what sustainability was in our space. So they're becoming much more educated, and we're educating them, by the way. Now, here's one of the pieces that I think is the biggest impact that we invested very early on, understanding that uh, reporting was going to be part of the equation. Um, ESG is a phrase to a lot of people, but it is material to a lot of corporations, a lot of decision makers. We built because we control the supply chain. We built a algorithms into our system. So what happens is our clients, um, every ounce of product that is being utilized in their space, and we do work with a lot of large footprints, that impact gets recorded, gets brought back into our system, and our algorithms actually give them an environmental impact report. Very sophisticated report, right down to trees they saved, to the carbon reduction they've done, and so on. These impact reports are being utilized by a lot of our Fortune 500 clients, and they put them in shareholder letters. Right, they're very proud of it. They announce it in their spaces through their video screens. That piece of equation is very, very important to our clients. And again, it differentiates us enormously from anybody else who's out there. No matter how big they are, they haven't been able to put their arms around being able to take the diverse portfolio, okay, with tree-free materials and plastic-free materials, and be able to put that into some form of impact. We've done that, and it's truly a big part of our equation when it comes to differentiation.
No, that's wonderful to hear, and it's actually hope. The hope rises when you hear things like what you're talking about. That impact does matter, but of course, we are also practical business people who are faced with situations where the customer will say that your other guy is giving you 1 cent less. So, are you really seeing this change that people go beyond cost, especially when you talk to the purchase manager because his KPI is probably reduced cost? So how does that really go? Do you really think that the companies are evolving, like you said, and they're going to go beyond a cost to see the benefit? Or do you have to find a way to go beyond the purchase guy to talk to somebody who is able to see it more holistically? How does that kind of dance happen?
Well, look, we respect the purchasing individuals, the category managers. There's no question about it. They got a job to do. Uh, if I was to give you a number, I would say 95% of the time we are in budget to what they're currently paying. The other 5% is because some companies are still utilizing some very underperforming types of materials like foam. But 95% we're in budget. Um, but here's some of the feedback that comes from our clients. Okay, and maybe we should price it a little higher. But some of the feedback we do get is what you have done for our marketing and communications to our stakeholders and everybody else is worth 12 to 15%, right? And that is a fact, right? Because when we do convert facilities over, they get two pieces of information. They get the environmental impact report that's they're going to perform by utilizing our materials. They get a financial impact report. And 95% of the time, we're right in budget. In fact, they give us their budget. We. I don't think we bid. Now, I'm talking generally, but I don't think we actually bid, um, because price becomes probably the third item to be discussed. The other two are the front ends of what we've done, what we created, how we can give them all the education and reporting, and then at the end of the day, if they spend $200,000 a year, their budget's going to come in at $200,000 a year. It's it's a pretty easy sell when you take price off the table and deliver all these other types of assets. Um, and so that's why again, we choose carefully who we're making our presentations to. They asked me to do a presentation at a very sizable $2 million tree-free group that wanted our tree-free paper. Very large building management company with, I can't mention the place, but it's one of the larger buildings in New York State. Um, and The impact that they see is incredible. Some of these companies are saving a forest every year, right? So those impact reports and the ability to give them materials that have that type of impact is pretty significant. And generally speaking, they actually tell us what their budgets are. It's really pretty amazing.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear. And I'm sure a lot of listeners will get hope that people are looking beyond cost. Like you mentioned, it's the third thing on the agenda, not the first. So I think that gives generally the suppliers a lot of hope. Two more things on the product side. In terms of one is you mentioned the amount of number of products that you have. How do you manage inventory wells to make sure that it's not too much redundancy in your warehouses? And the second is I see a lot of complexity in distribution, especially when I look at the United States, and there is the big Cisco's of the world and the Bunzels of the world and the Aramarks. Then so all of that has to be tackled, because what you put out beautifully was that you have the complete solution. Now it could be even cleaning liquids and stuff like that, and that's a big inventory to hold. And I don't know if it simplifies your distribution because then they can deal directly with you. How do you look at both those things?
Well, our modeling has not changed. And as we brought this solution to the market, one of the things that I insist upon is that the experts in our organization actually are the ones that are making presentations to the clients, the end users. No disrespect to the middleman, uh, but what's happening quickly today is that the distribution partners we have literally are just opening the door to their clients because they don't have the internal expertise yet. They do get trained, but it's an evolution. So they open the door. And what we do is strategically geographically look at our execution. Now, we do have multiple warehouses around the country to support our client bases through mostly distribution, and we're building out distribution as we speak. And all we ask from a distributor partner is two things: educate your team, get certified on the people that are actually going to present something to a client, uh, and infuse the educational and the assets that we can bring to the table into your digital purposes, and the rest will take care of itself. And that's working very, very well for us, right? That's the way distributors can partner with us, not have much exposure, as they would always be saying. Hey, I can't take something new in. At the end of the day, it's not taking anything new; it's opening up new clients for you, right? And that's what we do well. So that is something I kind of grew up in, right? I had manufacturers back in the day who had some unique products, and those manufacturers were seasoned and educated. They'd come call on me when I ran the racetrack operations, and we were a big user. But I was always impressed, right? Today, you don't have much of that, right? Our core competency is making sure that we touch the end users, and those end users we back into any distribution that makes sense or existing supply chain that's in that region.
Yeah, and that lines me really well to your education program because I really did want to learn more about the Emerald Sustainability Academy. How did that come about? Why did you think of it? And of course, I hear this huge passion in you to generally to help people understand what is really happening with the products, and maybe it's also part of your journey. More than that, it seems like you did your whole own program and you got certified. So talk to us a little more about that as well, if that is true.
Well, to tell you the truth, I only got a 92. Okay, so I did pass. Okay, but um, it is a platform that I wanted instilled in our team from day one, and it's evolved quite a bit. It's not really something as a propaganda piece for Emerald Ecovations as much as it is keeping the folks educated on what is really happening. Right, it does help with it would supply chain partners and actually, we've had COOs get certified, right, of companies, right, because they want to learn what is this material you're using, how did it come about. It's still very new to a lot of folks. So we are very, very much behind that education piece, but it is evolved to the point where they want to know what new laws are coming down the pike. We deal with big companies, and not everybody in that company knows that, oh, boy, December of 2024, they're instituting this in the city of so and so. A lot of these companies are not on the forefront of that because their people aren't touching that. And it's not an item category that's like HVAC or water, distilling systems. This is something that's a little bit off their radar, but it has a material impact on their business. I mean, companies could get fined. So we keep them very much in tune to the new laws that are coming back, both on state, local, and federal levels. So it's a constant evolving, engaging type of webinars and educational pieces. And then they have access to that information on a regular basis. So it'll continue to evolve. In fact, we have a live webinar with several pretty high profile people. I believe it's next week on the 3rd or the 4th. And we have a representative from the New York City Mayor's office. I hope she still comes on. They're having some challenges there, but very much engaged in what we do as a company, as well as our CSO. That's going to be on the webinar. So there's 3 or 4 other folks, including myself. But I enjoy these. I enjoy being able to hear what is going on too. We learn from these webinars ourselves, right? So it's a great platform, and it's really working for us.
No, and it clearly shows the intent as well that you're not just there to run a business. You're trying to go beyond that idea and then bring in a cohort together that is taking the whole industry to a different level. So kudos to you for that. And the other fascinating bit is also this. You mentioned it in passing, but I want to learn more about this whole idea of what you mentioned, cradle to cradle or end of use, but collaborating with waste management groups and taking that idea that we hear all the time in the industry. Yes, it's compostable, but who will compost it? So how did you come about that? What is the initiation that has happened, and how do you see that going forward?
Well, it's a stepping stone, and as I said earlier, it's the last leg of our journey that really completes the cradle to cradle, which was on our board 12 years ago. Um, so, the first step is obviously producing goods that are going to be vetted and be able to go into the composting that's going to ultimately come out as a clean organic material. So we've achieved that, obviously. And then it's a matter of re engineering the actual waste management companies. It's like everything else. Waste management is an industry that is a legacy industry, and they may have their own nuances and their own agendas, and some of them are run by multinationals right now. But at the end of the day, they have to readily admit that they're failing at this whole recycling program, and if they want to join, which they are, our logistics piece of the equation. Our clients will be very engaged. They want this as much as we do. They just never had a source or a solution to get it done. So, because we are on site at these, high profile clients across the board, um, part of the process it requires three things. It requires a product that can be composted. It requires a composting facility that is ready and geared up and has the capacity to do it. And then it requires us working the logistics of the waste management companies, or bring in an independent group that's going to acquire these products on site and bring it out to our composting, contracted composting licensed facility. So those three things are very important. But here's the cap and the cherry on top. Nothing gets done unless those folks in those big environments are trained, educated, and have the communication tools, right? So it requires us to be on site, and we're looking at 1,000 population or less is going to require probably two people on site for a week. Anything larger than that is going to probably require two people on site for 2 weeks. But we will be educating and helping them sort these products to streamline it, and that's going to take time. That's going to take energy and investment to get it done. But that's what's necessary to make a system like this get re-engineered. But it is. We. I don't know if you saw the press release that was announced just the other day. If you didn't, we'll get one out to you. But um, we're getting inundated, right? And this is really just a launch process. So the first quarter of next year will be much more entrenched to open it up to a bunch more customers. Um, but it is something that is well needed. And you're absolutely right. The question is, what happens to all this? Even though they're paying the same and they're getting all these impact reports, they're all very excited about that. But our job was to complete the cradle to cradle. That's not something that was just winged on. That was on our whiteboard 12 years ago. So I'm very happy and very proud of my team to get this to where it is today. And that's what makes me get up every morning at 4:30.
4:30, that's early. That's wonderful. And it's interesting that you keep mentioning the term cradle to cradle, because Bill McDonough, who coined that term, was my first guest, and he remains a personal mentor and a friend. And kind of, we kicked it off together. But fascinating thinker as well,
Mm.
on this. And of course, he's a force to be reckoned with, even at his age now. So you make it sound, Ralph. You just make everything sound so simple, succinct, and everything is going as it should. I'm sure you have challenges. So what are the biggest ones? Like, what would you consider to be, okay, my three biggest challenges that make me think that, okay, I need to do more in this area?
People, people, and people.
I was
Okay.
listening to a podcast
I probably
before.
spend
Right.
20% of my time meeting, interviewing people. They don't know they're being interviewed. Okay. But I am interviewing. Uh, I just added a couple of higher profile individuals to the organization. Uh, it requires, we're in an industry, and maybe some of your listeners understand the disposable space, maybe some don't. But it's an old industry, right? When we talk about legacy, we're talking about an industry over 100 years. It hasn't changed. And the peers that I've had over the years, some mentors, some good friends and associates in the business, unfortunately, they're either retired or they passed on, right? I'm 64 years old. Um, I have to build a group that is understanding what we have done and passionate about what we're doing, but have to educate them in this space, in this disposable space that is still somewhat, you know, ancillary to folks who are leaving, Harvard or some other high profile school. Um, but that is my biggest challenge. And beyond that, with all the right people, a lot of the day to day, the R&D, the continue evolution, uh, building out composting regions around the country. That all happens when you put the right people in place. So we have the mechanics, and yeah, I do sound confident. And you're right. I talk as if it's easy, and people have always said that to me. Uh, Trust me, it wasn't easy. But when you put the pieces of the puzzle in place, and they are moving, fluidly, then it's just a matter of getting the right people to make sure it continues that way. And that is the challenge right now.
Yeah, that's interesting. Again, very clear. But what I also see is this whole drive, not just people, but providing the right culture. And I see a lot of your family involved. Your wife is also vice president in the company, and I think at least one of your sons is working in the business. So, how do you build culture to ensure that the amazing people that you attract are driven and are doing the work that their highest potential can be kind of generated?
Well, as a CEO of a company and one who really kind of put this ball in play, I try to bring the right people in and keep hands off. You know, uh, we're not in an industry where tomorrow you can look at it and go back in your papers and say, "Oh, this happened in 2020." We know what to do. When you're in an industry that's evolving, and as I alluded to earlier, recognizing new markets and finding new opportunities to make things, I sometimes say, we don't know what we're going to make tomorrow. I just need to figure out how to get enough material to do it, right? Uh, but that is the type of management I come from. I come from, bringing the best, the most talented, the most passionate, and allow them to, you know, sometimes make mistakes, and that's okay. Um, you don't want them to make that same mistake again. That's the rule I have. But so, how do you build that culture? You build it by allowing people to feel they can come up with stupid questions and don't call it a stupid question. And that's the kind of culture I like. The day to day operational pieces of our business, in some degree, are very mechanical, right? Um, but as we bring on sales teams and we talk to distributor sales reps, I just brought on a group that's quite sizable, and the sales individual that wants to head it up is young, dynamic, passionate. Sat with him twice. Um, and he said, "What do you want me to do?" I said, "Learn, understand what we do, come up with where you feel you're going to fit in your presentations, and just open doors because the rest will take care of itself." He said, "I want to be the head salesperson in your company in 2 years." I said, "No problem. Be whatever you want to be." Okay. But it's allowing people, the right people, to take control of their own destiny. And whether it's sales, marketing, production, R&D, it doesn't matter. So culture is not what you make of it, it's what they make of it.
That's well put. And I'm going to pivot completely. to the farmer and the gardener in you. So I see you delivering a lot of vegetables and fruit and foals, I'm told. So tell us more about this passion that you have for being in on the ground and feeling the soil and creating things and delivering them as well. Let's talk about that.
It's funny, you know quite a bit about me. That's interesting. Um, some things I don't really like to promote and advertise, but uh, I am up early in the morning. 4:30, I do. I sleep 4 hours a night. That's just been who I am, and that hasn't changed
Wow.
since as long as I can remember.
The new age people will be aghast. They talk about 8 hours and up.
Well, I'm still here. I'm 64, and I've been doing it for 60 of them. So um, I love gardening. I have a very beautiful garden that I inaugurate from seeds. I do bring seeds in from different parts of the world, uh, particularly in Italy. So I do actually start in early March in a seedling in a lighted rooms. And at the end of the season, I probably have about 300 to 400 pounds of vegetables, everything from lettuce, peppers, tomatoes, figs, pears, uh, you name it, I got it. And it is a lot of work, right? So the first couple hours in the spring, right through the early part of summer, I'm up very early working in that garden, and it is a great feeling to put your hand in soil. And speaking of soil, we do actually compost our own soil, right? Because where I do farm, I have a horse farm, and we've been breeding horses for 25, well, I guess it's probably close to 30 years now. Um, and we've probably had over 80 foals born on our farm. And my children, as early as 5, 6 years old, were in the stalls pulling babies out of their mothers and assisting them. And so, we may be 45, 50 minutes out of Manhattan, but uh, they were born on a farm. And I think that's going to resonate with them for many, many years. Until today, we still deliver babies on our farm. We have two foals, in fact, running around the property right now. Um, and it's an interesting lifestyle. It takes us away from the everyday nonsense of business to some degree, but it also resonates with the reality of what it's like to be environmentally friendly in a lot of ways, and I think that's really helped my children understand that.
And also, just the running string of this conversation for me has been authenticity and integrity. So in a way, it kind of blends in with that idea. You are one with nature, and this kind of also is clear that it grounds you in some ways to that idea, which you kind of talked about as well. It's not the business is for ultimately the ecology for the future, and this kind of connects you very, very deeply. But there's another aspect to you which is again so inspiring in some ways. I looked at your awards, and most of your awards are actually to do with the community. They are not to do with a great business guy, which is true. But the leadership award with cancer and autism and things like that, and working with the community, how does that blend in, and why is that so important to you, and clearly you spend time being part of these movements.
Well, in the last several years, I've stayed more behind the scenes than in front of the scenes, and um, when you have a child like we had, a third child, and you see the challenges of other parents with children with issues. Um, it never goes away to watch in some cases the despair, and in some cases, how you can help motivate and energize, particularly a lot of single moms who are unfortunately in these positions with these handicapped children. Um, and my wife, who is an absolute spectacular partner in many, many ways. Um, she is one of those folks that just does it and never complains. Um, and together, we've been able to understand that, what, giving back goes in many different ways. Sometimes money is easy, but when we had John Paul at one of our local special schools, I dressed the kids up as elves, and we'd go by with one of our horse carriages, and we'd deliver 300 gifts to the school, right? And I dressed up as Santa Claus, and she was Mrs. Santa Claus. Those are memories that you'll never forget. But what you really don't forget is the smiles on the faces of these young individuals, right? So giving back is more time than it is anything else. And I think in terms of how I was kind of molded, I was molded by circumstances, right? And whether it was losing your dad at a very early age and taking on a lot of responsibilities, or whether it's dealing with some of the health issues that you're surrounded with and take in and nurture and deal with head on. So that's kind of how I was molded. I was molded by circumstances.
I think that's so well put. We all are, and many times we don't realize it, and
Right.
that's the big difference. The other fascinating topic, and this is a personal interest to me as well, is that you also looked at a lot of natural healing methods,
Mm.
and how did that come about? I presume it's from the circumstances again, but you could have gone very very non-natural, but you chose differently. Is that also to do with your kinship with the earth?
Yes, and not only that, but I do have some associates over the years from India, and I had quite a few associates from Asia, particularly China. Very good friends over the years, and most of them know my circumstances with my youngest child, but you learn a lot. I mean, you learn to accept the drug industry as it is in this country, but you also learn to look elsewhere, right? And, today, before a child is 12 years old in this country, they get 72 vaccines. I mean, it's almost unheard of, right? Like growing up in this country, I think we had two vaccines when I was a child. Um, we can't be influenced when there are some very basic natural things you can do. Now, I don't profess to be the greatest, nutritionist in the world, um, but I am also not someone who would listen to any type of pharmaceutical drug as a magic bullet. There are a lot of things you can do naturally, like walking on grass barefooted. I mean, simple stuff, right? So I did over the years surround myself with people who gave me a lot of direction um, in how to look at things in a more natural way. And I still believe it today, and I'm still learning. Right? I was just listening to something that my masseuse gave me, who is very, very engaged in holistic medicine, and it's very interesting. Meditation does work. Um, so I try to utilize as many tools that I think make sense, and I think folks who are not one dimensional should learn to be multidimensional and really open up and listen, because you don't have to be the most educated. You just got to sometimes just listen to folks from experience, and really that's a lesson I try to teach all these young people. They think Google is the answer all the time. Well, you know what? Google doesn't have the nuances, right? I'd rather learn from experience, which I did. I said, I made less mistakes in my life because I did learn from experience.
Absolutely. And of course, I grew up a lot around natural medicine. And my mother was, again, somebody who always tried natural methods. She still does. Each time we have a cough, there'll be something boiling on
Right,
the stove with numerous
right,
herbs.
right, right,
Drink this,
right.
at almost 50, I get that. Drink this. And and then the other fascinating thing that's happened in my life, and again, I love to explore indigenous cultures, and there's so much richness there. We are opening a factory in Guatemala, and it's been mind blowing, Ralph, to see the Mayan knowledge. And I've now got a dear friend there who's an anthropologist and really knows the medicinal systems of the Mayan culture, and she's kind of bringing it more into the mainstream. But it's fascinating, and it's
Yeah,
also to do with not just the herbs, but the energy with the herbs. How do you kind of channelize that? It's not just what you will take in, it is how and how you'll be thankful for it. So I've gone on jaunts with them to collect this precious plant. But it's what the beauty of that is how they take permission from the plant, that can I take you with me? Is it
Mm,
okay? And
right.
it's just the respect that is endowed in that process, and
It's a
that's been
it's a
beautiful
connection.
to
It's a
watch. It's a
connection.
connection,
It's a
exactly.
connection
It's
with
an
nature.
energy connection. So we've gone so down this beautiful path that it's tough for me to bring it back into business, but I'll try. So so what are the if there are few products that you're very excited about, what are those, and what does the future look like to you for Emerald, for Paradigm, say in the next 5 years? Products and maybe scale or future. How do you see that coming along?
Well, from a product perspective, we're always looking at adding products that make sense. As I mentioned earlier about our packaging division and how we think there's going to be a huge opportunity as we build out our raw materials and be able to produce our boards to the point where it becomes a retail packaging arena. So that is one of the areas that I'm spending my time on right now. On the peripheral side of just adding new products into our general portfolio, that just is ongoing. Um, you know, that's a process that just takes place based on feedback from the field and from the market and from the supply chain. Um, but I don't look at scale as a necessity of being successful. And I think I'm probably one of the few CEOs that think that way, right? Um, one of the things I look at is um, you know, being able to provide the products and solutions to clients that really respect it. Our retention rates are like 99.6%, right? Um, that to me is success, right? Because as you alluded to earlier, there are businesses that get thrown out for 15 cents, right? Um, that's not who I want to be. I've seen that world. I've been in that commodity driven distribution world. It's exhausting. So I'd rather put my energy behind not only the ability to continue to evolve as a company, but to really change an industry. That's my goal. I mean, at 64, what is my legacy? My legacy is that we finalized the platform that's going to continue to evolve. And at the end of the day, its only goal is to change industries that haven't changed in 100 years. And we did that in other industries, not me personally, but my benchmark and learning curve from that was the foam cup story, right? That was really a catalyst. And I believe I was really one of the first to really inaugurate that and change an industry. So that's what gets me up early. That's what keeps me motivated. That's what I'm going to continue to do for the next 5, 10 years, as long as I can.
And that's very different, like you said, from a typical conversation from a business perspective. And it reminded me of my wife, who I talk a lot about width and growth and all of that. And she'll say, you can also grow deep. You don't only
Mm,
have to grow wide. So it reminded me of that idea that, when you look at, don't always think 1000x in terms of scale. You can think like 1000x in terms of depth, the kind of kinship that
she's
you are
very
building.
smart. She's very
She is a
smart.
smart woman.
Yeah, very
I'm
smart.
definitely blessed. Okay, that takes me to my final question. What does good garbage mean to you?
What does good garbage mean to me? Well, you're younger than me, but I grew up in a time where excess wasn't the norm, excess was the exception. We learned how to utilize things multiple times, right? And again, it changed so quickly. But there was a saying back then that reminds me quite often of what it is today. What was one man's garbage is another man's gold. And that's, I think, is where garbage needs to go, right? How do you turn one person's garbage into something that can be relived and reborn? And to me, that's what garbage is. is a bad word for something that shouldn't be a bad word.
Absolutely, well put and succinct, as has been the conversation. This has been such a joy, Ralph, to speak to you, not just from a business perspective, but just the person you are. It's been personally inspiring for me to
That's
watch
very
how you
nice.
live your life and your passion and your drive to do better each day. So thank you for being the person you are, and thank you for coming on the show and educating all of us. And I'm sure those listening will also leave inspired like myself.
Thank you. That's very nice of you to say, and I appreciate the time you gave me. And God bless all. We move forward.